Hey guys, Spartan117GW, and today we're going to be talking about my 82nd Airborne Paratrooper loadout. Without further ado, let's get into the gear. So the gun that I chose for this loadout is the G&G M1 Garand. This was the standard issue rifle during World War II, and it was actually very special because it was one of the first semi-automatic standard infantry rifles introduced to pretty much every unit that was on the ground. As you can see, this is an entirely full real wood furniture, essentially from the front all the way down to the buttstock. The entire thing is made out of real wood and real metal. It's actually very similar to M14s in terms of that's basically the same type of gearbox that they use for this. You have the rear sight and the front sight, which are adjustable, so it does give you some flexibility, although typically you probably want to keep it on the lowest setting. One thing that's interesting is that the battery compartment is right here. It has a Tamiya adapter, and it's rated for 11.1 LiPo. So you can go ahead and put a buffer tube style battery in here. That's what I would recommend, and then you're good to go. This shoots about anywhere between 380 to 400 FPS, so it actually meets most field limits. One thing that's interesting about this that's different from the actual M1 is that this uses a detachable magazine. This is on the low side for Airsoft, 20 rounds, although if you're playing a World War II themed game where guys have bolt action guns or other types of rifles like this, that actually isn't too bad. Now, to access the hop-up unit, you pull the bolt back and you actually have a dial right here. It's very easily accessible. If you're familiar with the M14s already, then this should be extremely familiar. So one of the reasons why I like this rifle is that getting to this is actually very easy, and it's also really satisfying. Now this is actually an M1 carbine sling. It's what I have on hand, but this is what I have set up for this rifle. You would typically use something like a 1917 sling, which is a larger leather sling that would go with this rifle. But for my purposes, this works very well. You also have a bayonet lug, although I haven't actually tested one on here. This is typically where your standard bayonet would go for those very epic bayonet charges. Next up, let's talk about the headgear. This is the M1C version of the M1 helmet, specifically meant for airborne operations. The helmet design is very interesting because this is the first time they had a new helmet introduced post-World War I. This helmet, basically the shape, kind of stuck around almost all the way until Vietnam and maybe even to the early part of the 80s before helmets were replaced with Kevlar. What's cool about this helmet is a two-piece system. You have the shell, which is metal or steel pot. Then you also have the liner. The liner is actually pretty dang comfortable, and I've worn a lot of different helmets. I'm actually surprised how comfortable something is from the back in World War II. One thing that's really cool about this helmet specifically is it also has the Airborne chin strap, which is really cool. It's a very unique look. What I'm basically doing right now is what's known as John Wayning, where you have one chin strap that's completely not attached, so that way the helmet kind of bobbles around a little bit, but it's actually more comfortable because when you have that set up, it's really mainly used just for jumping. Now on to the web gear. Now this is where things get really interesting in terms of the different variety and variation that there was across the war. The paratroopers were very cool because they had a lot of access to what's called riggers. Those are paratroopers that are specifically skilled with modifying equipment, making equipment. They're the ones that pack the chutes for the airborne, but they also make a lot of custom gear. So what I'm wearing right now is basically an airborne infantry setup. You have the 1936 suspenders, you have your old school battle belt essentially, or World War II belt, and everything's just made of this old school webbing material, and it lasts a long time. You also have the medical first aid packet. Now a lot of reenactors or people that kind of copy the 506 will put the first aid packet on the helmet, but for most intents and purposes it's really meant to be worn on the web gear. You also have rigger pouches, like I mentioned before. These are actually kind of the next generation of pouches. It's kind of what inspired the modern day mag pouch because before everything was done with stripper clips and such, and you had like bandoliers and other pouches that were really geared toward that. Once magazines really came into play, stuff like rigger pouches really became very handy because with these you can run both carbine magazine pouches or you can run the clips for the M1 Garand. You also have on the web gear, you have the musette bag, which is basically like a miniaturized rucksack that goes onto the suspenders. And it's actually pretty handy because it's nice and small and compact. You can put just what you need in it, but it's not so big that's going to get in the way. I think it's a really cool part of the authentic look for the World War II paratrooper. Now for the uniform. This is where it gets really cool. The paratroopers had a specifically designed uniform just for them. This is the M42 jump uniform, and it's also the reinforced version. Because they had access to riggers, they were actually able to reinforce a lot of the portions like the elbows, the knees. They're also able to put specially sewn in straps for the legs to kind of help keep things, in the pockets, and if they had to tie down extra equipment that was tied to them, that could also be useful as well. The uniform is very well thought out. There's a lot of snap buttons. There's a main zipper going down the front. There's a lot of pockets here, like on the neck. There's a pocket here that's really meant just for like a little knife in case you get stuck and you need to, basically cut your lines on your parachute or something like that. And it's actually made out of some really nice material. When it comes to the boots, these are pretty much the OG, the classic. These are the Cochrane jump boots. I've actually worn a version of these, the black version, when I was in the Army, both in the 82nd and when I was with 112 at USASOC. Same style of boots, it's just these are the old school brown and not the new black boots, but they are very, very well known in the military community as jump boots or paratrooper boots. They have a very iconic look, and once you break these things in, they're actually very, very comfortable. So here's a couple of extra things to kind of go along with the whole loadout. For one, the Insignia. 82nd Airborne Division. This is the unit that I was with when I was at Fort Bragg. It's also very famous for making the jump into Normandy, Market Garden, and some of the other jumps during World War II. Also have my garrison or overseas cap. This has the orange piping for the signal corps, and then has the little paratrooper flash. They actually changed throughout the war what different insignia was used on the garrison cap. Later in the war, it was changed to something completely different. And that's one thing that's interesting. In a span of from 1944 to 1945, the uniforms changed, the gear changed. I mean, the military was moving at a very, very quick pace. You had guys wearing stuff that was from the very beginning, like a D-Day, and you had guys wearing new gear. It was very, very transitional, kind of what you see today with guys wearing multicam and UCP and ACU. And one cool little extra doodad is this. So, pretty loud. This is the D-Day cricket. It was only meant to be used during that first Operation Neptune, just that first night, because it was basically a very simple challenge to pass. It was one click was, hey, who are you? 2 clicks was a response like, hey, I'm friendly, or you pretty much get annihilated. But this was a cool little thing. They only used it for the first day because they figured the Germans would figure it out pretty quickly, but it made identifying friend or foe at night, when back then we didn't really have a lot of different cool accessories to signal friend or foe or cat eyes or anything like that. It made things really handy, and just one little extra little cool thing to go along with the whole loadout. I'm Spartan117GW. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys are curious about the gear and the rifle, it's a G&G M1 Garand. You can also get the gear from at the front, pretty much head to toe. But thank you guys for watching another edition of Tactical Gearheads here on GITV.